Management simulation games are few and far between. We are decades away from the time where they were a staple of the PC gaming lineup, and during that time most of the interesting angles had been tried and arguably perfected, leaving the few modern offerings at odds with existing styles and formulas. There are a handful of standouts, but what we mostly have now are a mixture of offerings that fall into three categories: games that focus on a singular simple concept, mediocre attempts, or light versions of existing franchises. Then out of the blue, SimCasino pops up, a modern Casino Tycoon Simulation in full 3D. It aims at those simulators of old, going so far as to get Sims and SimCity composer Jerry Martin to do the soundtrack. But does it do the style justice while offering its own satisfying spin? First and most importantly, SimCasino launched in early access. This obviously will make a lot of people hesitate, myself included. But I'm happy to say that all the current development efforts appear to have gone into front-loading gameplay content, making sure you have a decent amount of things to build and a degree of control over management and smaller nuances of your business. But outside of that, well, there's a lot to be desired. Basically, if it isn't something that you can place or put together, it doesn't look all that great. Surrounding areas look dead, people look weird, have extremely basic animations, and aren't visually distinct based on what type of customers they are. Objects that are meant to move act odd, there are various clipping and pathfinding issues, everything seems too quiet, the crowds don't really make noise, and all I hear is the game's music. The game starts to act weird when you start going up more than one floor. I could go on and on, but I understand. The game is in early access. This is the current state we are in. All of this should be obvious, but given the volatile nature of the early access landscape, certain things need to be said, so bear with me if I repeat facts that you already know. Now, because the game is in early access, I'm going to limit how much I nitpick small details and focus on core features of the game that had the most effort put into them. Most of these smaller issues I just described, and the rest you can see with your own eyes. The only ones I will mention from here on are more important to core gameplay, are satisfactory now but won't be if the game intends to grow, or are small quality of life changes that will likely get overlooked otherwise. Now, that was a lengthy disclaimer, so let's just get on to talking about the game. The whole premise of SimCasino is building and managing a casino. As of launch, there are no scenarios or challenge modes, leaving you solely with the goal of not going bankrupt. You start by picking out a lot and getting to work on the actual building. You set foundations, put up walls, and zone everything to properly designate what can be done with and who can access the spaces you put together, with full control over shape and size. The process and tools you use are satisfactory, even if somewhat simplistic. It takes the building process you'd be used to in this type of game with some added shortcuts, like being able to build multiple floors with a wall at the same time, and an eyedropper tool that lets you quickly copy objects, and styles of floors and walls, which there are plenty of. The overall process is serviceable, but it is lacking in some areas. You can't build diagonally, you can't quickly adjust existing room parameters, copying styles and colors is a little wonky, and jumping between building, decorating, and buying other objects is awkward as the UI is a bit cluttered and disorganized. But when you have your building started, your next step will be games and offerings, with various slot machines, card games, even betting stations. When it gets down to these, you can manage the smaller rules and details behind them. Take slot machines for instance. You can mass place them if you want, but you can also fine-tune them, change win chances and payouts, swap out brands to save on commission fees, or maybe just keep it simple and change the color and type of chair. These kinds of details extend to most of the machines and games that are available to you, and micromanaging the machines is a key process in maximizing profits and completing your decorative vision for the casino. In addition to your gambling ventures, there are other categories you'll have to look at to get the most out of your experience. Primarily in entertainment and accommodations. There's also dining and drinks, but at the moment your options there are limited to buffets and a single type of bar. With entertainment, you have activities that fall outside the scope of games. Currently, bingo halls and a theater. Bingo is simple enough, but the theater requires scheduling shows, adjusting ticket prices, finding the right type of entertainment for your audiences, and accommodating your performers. General accommodations are simple enough. Build rooms, add amenities, zone properly, and you will have yourself a hotel, with places to keep guests, hold conferences, and even just a place to use computers. That's really it for these two. They technically make up a large part of the game, and you may not necessarily be expecting them in the first place, but currently they are lacking in notable depth, and function much the same way your other facilities do. You need more money, and the people that live around here are apparently business customers, so build a computer room and watch them flood in just like they do with your slot machines. So, you've built zones, installed games and facilities, have the card tables ready. Before your next expansion, it's time to manage. I talked about individual games already, but there are other things that you'll need to keep an eye on. Menus dedicated to income, expenses, managing loans, advertisements, your employees, new research, and customer feedback. It puts a lot in front of you, but the menus mainly keep information and records all in one place, as opposed to giving you new insight on your casino. You'll find most of your games and other sources of entertainment laid out here for easy editing. The game will automatically hire staff for these and other facilities as you fill out complete zones. But you'll need to manually hire for certain positions like security and housekeeping. And you can get the most out of all your employees by sending them out on patrols to keep the place clean, safe, and free of crime. Taking out and paying off loans at the appropriate times will help you expand quickly, but attracting customers and keeping their needs fulfilled to the best of your abilities is what will sustain your income. There's a certain unintended brilliance to giving all these nameless patrons an extensive list of needs that you can never hope to balance perfectly at all times, driving you to make adjustments and fine-tune each area and facility, much like it can, should, and typically is handled in the real world. But right now you'll be stuck with overly fickle customers who won't show up and are never happy, or a dedicated following that will show up the same time every day to use the same facilities for that same amount of time, just because they are available. And there needs to be more to the game than that. When you have all this laid out in front of you, when you see everything the game has to offer, you come to understand a few things about it. On a positive note, the game has way more options available than the name would imply and shows that it isn't afraid to dip into the associated mechanics. And the whole thing is held together by the basic zoning system that keeps everything mostly tidy and is a quick way to see what each part of your casino needs to actually function, which is helpful as you juggle gambling, entertainment, and accommodations. But getting into these different facilities has a negative side effect where the scale of the game catches up to it, and I mean this both visually and functionally. It's hard to put into words exactly. The people feel too large, or maybe the lots are too small. If you've ever stayed at a hotel or seen a casino, everything else feels cramped by comparison. I've been to various hotels for meetings, and the smallest Marriott dwarfs some of the larger options I foresee in SimCasino. You see, intentional or not, there's a clear comparison to the feel of the simulation games of the late 90s and the early 2000s. Blending the functionality of these games leaves everything off balance. While the building systems work, they are reminiscent of systems used for the individual homes in The Sims, and some of the lots even feel the same size. But at the same time, if I take full advantage of the game's offerings, I end up cramming these lots full of variety like you'd try in a game like Roller Coaster Tycoon, which there isn't necessarily enough space or content for. And the zoning system, which holds the game together and is most common in city management games like SimCity, highlights just how compact the game really is. If I try to make offices for my staff any larger than what is essentially a brick cubicle, I'm wasting space. Not that it matters, because if I don't have them patrol, they are more than happy to stand around and do nothing. But the same applies to hotel rooms. Why would I attempt to make ritzy high-end suites if I will only be able to make so many for a negligible return on investment that ultimately cuts into space I could use for other more profitable facilities I already have, or cramped hotel rooms with bare necessities? It could be that this stems solely from the early look and lack of detail. It could even be from my familiarity with the other games I just mentioned. Maybe it all goes away with some better visual feedback or content additions. But if it is more than that, and not addressed, it will hurt the game in the long run. Now let's say you fix these issues. You'd still need more content added as you go along. Accommodations don't feel distinct or fleshed out. There are very little options in entertainment, and even gambling needs more additions. Or at least the differences between card games, machines, and bets needs to be a bit more substantive. Dining and refreshments need to be bumped up in importance. Let me make different types of bars. Let me make high-class restaurants away from the buffet lines and have it affect my rating. Aside from that, clean up the UI, tools, and shortcuts. Make copying and pasting styles over objects a little smoother. Let me copy and paste entire room layouts to make hotels less tedious. I mentioned graphics and animations earlier. In animations, I gave the game a lot of passes because it is still in development. I understand that if you need to cut corners, you'd start with basic animations like carrying objects. Sure, this is weird, but I get it. Unfortunately, if I'm staring at an employee doing circles around trash and I can't tell if they are picking it up or if the pathfinding is having a fit, you have issues. All of these things, everything I just mentioned, needs to be addressed in some capacity for the game to succeed in the long run. To end on a light note, even if the game were to crash, burn, and go the way of most early access titles, we will still have it to thank for a wonderful soundtrack. I mentioned at the beginning that composer of the Sim series and master of jazz Jerry Martin composed the soundtrack for SimCasino. In fact, it's one of the reasons I imagine many people heard about the game, and man oh man, it does not disappoint. With a style he described as future jazz and retro funk leading the way on a project that rivals his work on the SimCity series. I can only hope that if the game follows through on improving, that he will return to add additional music proportionate to its growth. SimCasino has a lot of promise. This is a good first step, but it needs to improve quickly, and I can't stress enough that the credit I gave it is weighted by the current development phase the game is in, and contingent on consistent improvement. It is not a complete package by any stretch of the imagination, but you can see the potential of what could be. A healthy dose of polish, refinement in detail, and consistent additions to content could put SimCasino up there with the greats it takes inspiration from. And I hope that it does.